Still done.
It's like 20 seconds from npm start to it's rendered.
Good one.
Should be pretty fast after that, though, at least, right? Like once it loads.
Yeah.
Once it's
To re-render.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, so let's just start with a review here. So we're in our stencil project where you can start at app root. So what does this do? What does this component do?
That routes, so it takes the URL and it goes to the component file, like app to do list .tsx. It looks for that, and then it fires that up.
Yeah. So, like Evan, if I wanted to make it so that we didn't go to app to do list from the root, but instead we went to app to do list from /to-do, how would I do that?
You would only have to add that into the URL attribute.
Yeah. So you would just add to do here, right? And if I wanted to make it so that I could go directly to an item, or directly to my app list component, if I go to /list, how would I do that? I wanted to create another route. It goes directly to app list.
An additional route?
Mm-hmm.
You can
Go ahead.
You can just copy and paste that basically, and so the URL after the slash, just put in whatever you want to put in, and then make that the component that you want to go to.
Great. Yeah, so some of this stuff might seem basic. I'm just trying to get a feel for where everybody's at, make sure everybody knows what's going on. Okay, cool. All right, so then if we go to our root of our app, we're going to end up at the app list component, which we can, or the app to do list component, which we can find in our app to do list folder. If I rename my app to do list folder like blue, what effect does that have on my project?
Nothing.
Nothing. It does literally no things. So just so you know, like you can rename the folders, you can move things around. If I rename my file red, what impact does that have on my project?
It'll never load that page. It'll actually crash because it won't find it.
It probably breaks your.
It does.
RubyMine is so smart that it asked you if you want to change your class name.
Yeah, it does.
Did that.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
I didn't see that.
yeah. So, but it does change the class name, but it doesn't actually matter. So also, if you change your class name, if I make this yellow, does this have any impact on my?
It actually looks inside the file.
What actually looks inside the file? The project.
In terms of it's looking for the tag.
It's looking for the tag.
So it
So-
looks inside the file, not even at the file name level.
Correct. So RubyMine loads thing, its autoloader, etc. looks for an actual file name that matches up to your class name. So in Rails, we have to be very careful about what we name our files and our folders and all that stuff. In JavaScript, it all gets compiled down to one file that's just a bunch of JavaScript, and it uses the tag then to go find the component. Okay. So at that point, it doesn't matter at all. It's all in one file. It's actually all in one file. And technically, actually, it's in multiple files because it's really smart. This is one of the great things about Stencil. The greatest thing about Stencil is actually not the framework itself. That's fine. It's whatever. It's mostly React. You could go like grab that off the shelf and use React. The great thing about Stencil is its deployment process. And by that I mean the way that it packages up all of your stuff. So what it does that's great, most JavaScript libraries, what they'll do is they will uglify and shorten and remove white space to improve performance. Right? We said that like you want to download files that are as small as possible. So it'll take all your JavaScript files, it'll put them into one file, it compresses them, changes all the variables to be one letter named variables so that things go a little bit faster. What Stencil does is a little smarter than that. It recognizes modules that are used together. So if a module uses another module, then it gets packaged together. And what that allows it to do is put them into multiple files and lazy load the files. So it says, hey, let me try and just find the file that has the thing that I need first. I'm going to load that in, and I'm going to wait on those other things until I need them. Now I have a reference, I have an initial file that has a reference that says, hey, this thing's in this file, this thing's in this file, etc. But I'm not going to try to load them until the point of actual need, which is pretty cool. So that way you can be super performant, even more performant than you would be if you put everything down at once. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you can think of it as all being in one file in the end because that's what ends up essentially happening. All right, so we have our red, blue. It doesn't matter what we name the files. It doesn't matter what we name the class. We can actually name all of our classes exactly the same thing in terms of the component world of things. You can name them all like C or something. It doesn't matter. There's usefulness in naming them correctly, and when we get to like some metaprogramming stuff, which I'll show you some things I've done, there's usefulness in naming them correctly, including just like mentally. Right? That's the biggest reason to name your folder and your file app to-do list and your class app to-do list is it's just mentally, oh, app to-do list is an app to-do list. It has a tag name app to-do list. It's all coordinated and makes sense. Okay. But not in any way necessary. All right, so okay, so if we go here and we start at app to-do list, that's our root route, right? So it takes this component and it puts it onto the page for us. What's going to happen when we load our page? Where do we start in terms of reading our code? Render. So you go down to render. We get this ion header, and ion toolbar, and ion title. What does this stuff do? How does this work?
In terms of like rendering, it goes
Just like what is ion header?
So
Where does that come from?
Those are all components that like that Stencil has built in.
Yeah, the Ionic version of Stencil has built in.
Yeah.
So we're taking components that were built by a third party, Ionic, and we're writing it. Do we need this at all? Do we need to use Ion anything? No. We can use regular HTML, just a bunch of divs or H1s or whatever. Right? Okay, if they just make things a little prettier, we're using their components.
Or just out of curiosity, are those somewhere in the project?
Yeah, so they're in, if you go to node modules, where is it? Maybe am I in the right? I'm in the wrong thing.
They're somewhere.
Oh, no, they're here. I'm just in the wrong. If you go into node modules, Ionic, core, dist, so just like our dist, it actually looks very similar. So if you look at our build, www build, you'll see some similar things. And there's a distribution version of this, which we're not currently doing. You can add a configuration that says and this will build a nice distribution folder. Basically what it does is it creates a folder that you can then upload to NPM to use as a NPM package. So again, the biggest thing about Stencil that makes it so great is its deployment process, the process by which it packages everything together. Makes it really easy for you to deploy NPM packages and all that kind of stuff. So, and the way that you build that is just instead of doing npm serve, you can do npm build. Whoa. Yeah. This is why I use Yarn, because you don't have to do the run script. It doesn't like something. Type dist. Namespace. I don't want to do that because it's going to get us into a whole world I'm not trying to get into right now. It's just one more thing that has to get done to make that work. But oh, yarn start. All right. But if we go back to our original guide, so we're here, the ion header, just to see how well you guys are starting to understand the Ionic stuff. Ion header, why do you use ion header and ion content together? You figured out what that does yet? It separates them. Why do we use ion content? Like, why not just...
So you can scroll.
So you can scroll. That's what it does. It makes it scrollable. So the header stays fixed at the top, and then whenever you put in ion content, it scrolls. Okay, then we have an ion card content. We're just putting things on a little card div. And then we say, let's stringify what the items currently are. So what does this command do?
Turns it into, does it just concatenate them?
So what it does is it takes something that is an actual JavaScript array or object or whatever, and it turns it into a JSON string. So JSON what's powerful about it is it always looks like JavaScript entities, so arrays and objects. But when we send it, when we're sending it from your computer, your client to the server, or in any way sending this information around, it's getting sent as a string. Because you can't send anything except for strings and payloads. You can't send like an object with functions on it anywhere. But what you can do is send a string.
Is that no longer like in our last project, we didn't have to do that. Like we were just doing that behind the scenes. Like I never had to use JSON string flags and JSON like an array or JSON.
Oh yeah. So for example, if you're using jQuery to send this stuff, yeah, jQuery automatically does that for you. So it knows when you're doing a post that what you really want to do is turn your JSON object or array into a string, and so it's calling JSON stringify behind the scenes and sending the information across. In our case, we're just using it for display purposes. If you don't, and just so you guys can see what this looks like, if you do something like this. So in the case of an array of strings, it just shows the concatenation. If it was an object, though, you're going to get weird stuff. So here, if we create like, right, so now it's an object with an attribute of data, and items is the value. Oh, it doesn't even show it. Okay. Frequently, you'll see something that's like object. In square brackets. So that's what that is. But this allows us to be able to view things. And then we follow into render items. When we go up to render items, we get here. So we say this items.map. What does map do?
It returns the new array.
Yeah.
The stuff that you've been changing.
Yeah, it returns the transformed array. Right, so each item gets transformed from one thing to another, or it gets mapped from one thing to another, and then returned as the entire array of the mapped transformed version. Okay. Do I have to put this return here?
No. Yes.
Yes. Why do we have to put it there? Yeah, because it's not Ruby, so it doesn't auto-return. So if you don't return something, it treats it as a void function. Mm-hmm. So the code gets run, but nothing gets returned, so this ends up being undefined. Okay. Same thing here. If you don't put this return here, it'll run the code, but it's not actually going to return the new value, so you're going to get back undefined. Okay. So returns are important. All right, so we return each one of these, and what we're really doing is we're returning this HTML element app item. What is app item? It's a component that we created, right? And it takes in two properties, item and index. Since we have these two attributes here, item and index, what does that mean that we have to have on our app list component? So let me try this way. If I try to put another... Yeah. So if I try to create another one called blue, what's this gonna do? It's not gonna like that. And it's not gonna like that because we don't have that prop on our app list. Okay. I actually should be complaining about this already. It might be. Yeah, see here? It doesn't have a blue string. The blue is not a prop.
Can you go to your app list file?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You named it app item. See, that's where the naming thing is weird.
Yep.
When you don't match it.
When you don't match it, it's very confusing. Yep. So, but if we add a blue, then what we had there was fine. But you have to have a property for each of the attributes that you're trying to put on the items that you pass. All right, so then they come in here though. So what are we going to replace essentially? What is this going to get replaced with?
The render function, the render return for item.
Yeah, so we're going to replace it with this set of code here, which is an item. It says when we click on it, we're going to call this update function. It's up here. We're going to return the item that we were passed in as a property. We're going to emit. When we click update, we're going to do this emit event. What is this thing about? What does this do?
It's sending is that data.
Yep. It's sending up an event named what?
Update item.
To anyone who cares. What do we mean by anyone who cares?
Anyone who's listening.
Anyone who's listening. Anyone who has a listener set to listen for update item. And when they receive that, they're going to get an event. That event is going to have an attribute called detail. That detail is going to have this. What I have highlighted.
Can you emit an event from a parent and have the child listen?
Nope, can't. That's why props go down, events go up. So if you want to send information down, you need to do it through a prop. Or you can pass it. There's another way of passing information around the system. Well, two other ways, really. Multiple. So it has to be. So another way of getting information from multiple places, like if it's a source of truth, it's sort of like a database. It's a persistence place, right? So just like you use persistence in Rails to keep your to-do list going, you have local databases available to you in JavaScript in the browser. There's several of these. The easiest one to use is called local storage. So you can do local storage.set in one of your components, and then in another component you can do a local storage.get. And as long as you name what the parameters that you pass into both of those the same thing, you can get it back. So it's just like a persistence layer that's local. So you can pass data around that way. Another way to do it is using IndexedDB, which is a more real database that exists in the browser. There's a thing called IDB keyval that you can use to be able to do that same sort of set and get functionality. So just so you know, there are other ways of caching data.
2 questions. When do those get cleared out?
So local storage gets cleared out when you click the clear button, or you clear it like from your own computer yourself. Session storage gets cleared out as soon as the tab goes away. So there is another version of local storage called session storage. Session storage is short term and only lasts for a little bit of time. Local storage or IndexedDB, you have to clear in your code somehow, or you have to go clear it from your browser as a user. You do that by going to like application, local storage. So right here, I have a session, and that's actually not from our code. It's because the local storage gets associated to whatever the URL is. And when I'm developing for our stuff, I have a session. And so that gets put onto local storage so I can see if I'm already logged. I can basically use the token that's here to see if I'm still logged in, my session's still valid, so I don't have to log in every time. Yeah. It also gives me back like a list of permissions, what my user ID is, stuff like that.
Okay. And then along like Ashton's question, I saw that you can, it said in the documentation that you can put the listener on the window or like the document as a whole. HTML document. So if the child put a listener on the whole the window and the parent send out an event, can't that child hear that?
It could. You really don't want to do that though.
Yeah, that's breaking it.
Yeah, you're going to global scoping at that point, and the problem is that if anything else tries to do something similar, you start to create potential bugs that basically, because everything's at such a global level, the whole point of this framework is trying to keep things modularized to the point that it makes sense. So you're just going to build things for your component, right? So the problem is, let's say that somebody else goes to use your component in the future, and they also did a similar broadcast with the same name. Now Windows listening for that broadcast, and now your child element is listening for that broadcast, but it's a completely different event that has nothing to do with what you were expecting. So now your code breaks because somebody else was doing something similar to you but different. See what I'm saying? That's why you want to stay in a very componentized, I only want to scope these things to what I'm working on. Yeah.
So it's like, it's possible to break it, but you should stick to within the rule that they tried to set up.
Yeah, so you can almost always find some way around anything, right? There's some other way of doing it, but there is certainly an advantage in trying to stick to the conventions they have here. All right, so what this is really doing, so what are we going to emit back up?
Update item. Oh, you're going to emit the data.
Yeah, so I'm going to emit index of whatever the index is. Where does index come from?
It's a property that you were given.
It's a property we're given from our higher level item, our list. And then the value, what is this? What is math.random to string?
It's a random number between 0 and 1.
Yep.
You're setting to a string.
So we emit that back up. So now we need to go back to our original component. And here we're listening for update item. So we're going to get this event pulled in here. Does it matter what I name this function?
No.
Because what we're doing is decorating the function so that any time a listener gets hit, it's going to call this function whatever it's called. And then we're going to do, so what is this line of code doing?
That's copying this item, so you have it defined.
Yep. And then the next line?
Setting the value field from the object that came back.
Yep. So what type of a thing is this going to be? What's it going to look like? What's the value going to be? Yeah, so
It's the random number.
it's just a random. It's a random number between 0 and 1, turned into a string, right?
Also, I guess quick aside, is it like the random numbers? Are they like like seeding? In terms of,
You
like,
can
okay,
seed.
Okay, you can seed.
Yeah. And all numbers, it turns out, are only semi-random when generated by a computer, unless you have a computer that has a what's it called? Like a quantum physics, like like where it's looking at where the predicted path of a quark happens to be in a place. Like that's the only way to really get a truly random number. Otherwise, it's based on some algorithm that's pretty random enough for our purposes most of the time, but not exactly random. There's some cool studies. The reason I know that there's some cool studies that were done when I was in grad school. Who knows? Like, well, I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense in the end. But this guy did a series of 10 studies, of which 9 of them produced significant results, looking at if people have ESP, essentially. Are they psychic? Clairvoyant, really, I think. So, like, looking into the future, is it possible for people to be able to predict whether the coin is going to end on heads or tails more than would be statistically likely, given that heads and tails is going to fall the same way. But you can't use a coin because coins are biased, right? Like there's a weight difference, so you can't just actually flip in the person flipping it, blah blah blah. So you want to use computers, and so in these series they get progressively more random and get to the point of using like these quantum computers for determining randomness. It's really interesting because he finds statistically significant results. The study was done in a way that it was. You had a brick wall that was there, and you had to predict whether the image was going to be relatively innocuous when it came up or it was going to be pornography. They used pornography. These set of studies ended up working out. There was a certain group of people, social risk-taking people, that tended to be more ESP than others. And so, like, I don't know, maybe it was more motivating for them to see the porn come up or whatever. But you would make a decision, and then the thing would come up, and they'd go through this whole series. And they did find, now it wasn't much more, and it was high numbers, low effect size, but statistically significantly more likely than you would imagine, given a randomness of 50-50 chance of what's going to end up coming up. And what's interesting, though, like the behind the scenes of that, this guy had been trying to do this for a really, really long time. So we've been trying to get some studies published on this for the last, 20 years when he finally got this set of studies published. Obviously, there's a lot of, incredulous people in science who are like, there's no way, this is nonsense, right? So that might have been part of it. But it's also possible a guy I knew was one of his grad students. He's like, he might have just done 100 studies. And if you do 100 studies, the statistical likelihood that 9 of them end up being statistically significant is reasonable, just by the way normal curves work, right? Like your sample effects end up just being. So it's possible that he did 100 studies. He took the 9 that were statistically significant and he published this, but who knows? Anyway, huge aside.
Working hard to prove ESP.
Yeah. So anyway, back to this. So we're taking the index. So basically, we told the item what its index was, so that it's easy for us to then swap out in the array. And so we say make whatever index it is, so 0 or 1 in our case, make it the new value that we're getting here. And then what does this line of code do?
Appending that to the end of the old array.
So it actually just resets the old array to the new array, to a copy of the new array. So this dot 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 syntax is just copy. It's just a copy of it.
Yeah.
You could add more elements afterwards.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So that would append something to the end as
That's
well.
basically syntax for save.
Yeah, it's basically syntax for safe. Yeah, yeah.
So dot 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 copy just means
Copy, and set items equal to a copy of copy.
oh that's right because you already updated a copy.
Yeah, so copy is a
Yeah.
copy of items,
Yeah.
and then we change copy, and then we're setting items equal to a copy of copy.
Right.
Which technically I think we would be fine if we just did this, but just to avoid the problem of, I mean, there's 0 performance cost of doing the second copy. It's like half of a nanosecond or something to do that. So. All right, so items is now updated. So what happens? Does anything happen, or are we just done? And
Is there a state?
Is a state variable, so
items is a state variable. So what happens?
it must be rendered.
So now we call our render function again. We go back through here. We render our items, but this time, let's say that we had clicked on the first item. What is our item going to be? So like in the previous one, let's say that we clicked on hello. We went through this process of basically saying we clicked on hello, which called update, which emitted up, which then changed items. So what is hello now?
What does the clicking do?
Okay, so all right, so I'm gonna click calls update.
Okay.
Update emits index and value,
Yeah.
right? And then we go back up here, and then so copy is a copy of the items. Let's say that our index, the one that we clicked on, was 0, so it was our hello. So now what is hello getting turned into? Some random number. So then this item gets updated. So the 0 index is now some random number. The second index, so the index of 1 is what?
It's goodbye.
It's still goodbye. That hasn't changed. Okay. And so now when because it's a state element and we're re-rendering, now items is going to be what? What's the first item?
Some random number.
Some random number. What's the second item?
Goodbye.
So what are we going to see on the screen?
Random number. Goodbye.
Is the JSON stringify, is this going to change?
Yes.
Yeah. So what's it going to be?
Random number. Goodbye.
Random. Same thing, right? So that's, well, break something. That's that. That's that process. It just took us like 5 minutes to walk through. That's that process. Okay. So we're done. What happens if I click on it again?
Another random number. Goodbye.
Different random. It's going through the process again. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? See what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just walk through this one more time. Why do we use props?
Props are things that come into the element set from above, and when they change, it re-renders.
Yeah, so properties are things that are set on an item that go downstream. So it communicates from the parent to the child.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I mean by set from above.
Yeah. So, but the thing there is, trying to think of how I can show this quickly. So let's say, we have our blue here, right? Let's use a variable there. Let's just make this like this dot blue. So this is going to start out as blue, let's say. But then when we do our update, let's change it to green. And then just so we can see it, let's just put it right here. All right. So you can see blue is there, right? The property is getting set. When I click update, when I click on one of these things, right? So let's say I click on this one. It's going to update the item. It's going to emit this event. It's going to bring us back to red. I'm just going to make a copy of our new item, so we're going to get a new random number set. We're going to change out our items. So now the state variable is changed, so we're going to re-render, right? And then blue is going to be set to green. So are we going to see green on the screen is the question.
No,
Why not?
because you saved before you changed the variable.
Yeah, because the render function was called before we changed the variable. My point is just that just because a property changes doesn't mean that it's going to change in a lower level, okay? You have to have a state change happen.
I thought you meant like at prop.
Yeah. So when the at prop changes from the perspective of the child, then it changes. I just want to make this point because you'll run into this where you're like, I changed that variable. Why is it not rendering? And it's because no state changes happened, so it doesn't know that it should re-render. Because really what's happening is we're re-rendering this entire item because a state change happened. At that point, those properties happen to be different. Okay. But it's not like every time a property value changes, it re-renders. If the property value changes from a higher level. And also, it doesn't actually even necessarily change if you change it at a lower level. So if we here said,
Oh, really?
yeah. So if we here said this blue equals yellow, and then I actually don't know what's going to happen here. Let's figure
Well,
this
you
out.
can't mutate it, but I'm pretty sure.
Weird stuff happens. So
Because you're changing it up there too.
yeah, my guess is
Well, from what I read in the documentation, it said at props and states when they change inside the child, inside the element,
Mhm.
it re-renders. That's what I've seen.
let's get rid of.
I've also had weird things in terms of like it's weird when you change the property inside, and then you also emit a message up above to change it. Weird stuff starts.
Yeah, let's just get rid of this for a second. Because we were doing weird things because it was like, it was blue, so the first time you click on it, it's blue, but now you've set the higher level one to be green, but you've also now set the lower level one to be yellow, so the next time you click on it, blue comes down as being green probably, which is the higher level one, and then on the third click, it's now yellow because you have changed it in your lower level thing. So let's just do the simple version. Yeah, so it does look like if you change it inside of your system that it will just do the auto update piece for you. You're not supposed to be able to mutate it though, so I don't know why that's there. All right. Cool. So, but we get props, they send things down. So properties is communication down. What is events? What do events do?
Communication up.
Communication up. What has to be on the up? What has to be on a parent for it to have any effect?
Listen.
Listens for the event, and then you can write code against that. And then what is this? What does state decorators do?
Anytime the variable that's decorated by state is changed, the render on that component can be called.
That's right. Okay. So everybody gets that? So those are the four big things with stencil that you need to be able to get things.
And you can't name a field ID. I learned the hard way.
You can't even
They
feel
will
like.
tell you can't do that,
Uh-huh.
but later on, things will just start chronically breaking and you won't understand why.
Wait,
Yeah, so-
what?
You can't
A
have
prop.
an at prop ID or at
Oh.
state ID.
Yeah,
or
so
at-
you-
Okay.
You don't want to take over things that are normally already used by the element. So an ID is an attribute that's available on every HTML element. So is class. So those are two that you really just don't ever want to do that. Yeah. Also, if you have an input field, like you don't want to have a text prop on your input field. It's just confusing because like now the raw HTML version you're trying to override it. It's like a keyword that we've seen in other places, like in JavaScript. If they present you with a keyword, you can't. So for example, you can't name. You can't use delete as a variable name because it's a function. It's a keyword that's taken by JavaScript. Yeah. All right. Any questions about any of this?
That's good.
I think you guys are getting pretty familiar with this, which is good. Tomorrow we'll get back to the actual fetch stuff. I kind of wanted to get there today, but I think this is more important to make sure you guys really understand like how these components work and flow through. Is there anything in particular that you guys are struggling with that you want to talk about?
No, we're gonna ask about a quick, like, what if I just want, like, we bring in things like, we're supposed to bring in things like jQuery underscore. What if I have functions that are like static that I just want to have
Okay.
or use that I came up with? Where would I put that?
Okay, so a couple things real quick. So I wouldn't use jQuery if you can help it at all, because you shouldn't need it for. But underscore is one that you would use all the time. If you have your own thing that you want, the way that I normally approach this is you create. They have a helpers folder, which is one way that you could do it, and you can actually look at the utils.ts where they're just exporting functions. So this is functional programming. I don't particularly like functional programming. I think there's a better organization that can happen in object-oriented programming. It's also more consistent with Rails, which is the other language that we're using in here, and with like the way that they do components. What I normally do is create, it's called services. So I create a new directory called services. And then inside of there, you create a new file. And then you export class. And then you can create a static function. I'm getting the syntax wrong. That's it. So like my class service or whatever, and create a static function.
Is that the return value?
That's the type scripting thing. Remember yesterday we talked about how you can say what type you expect to return? So that's the type of object you expect to return. So I expect that I'm going to return an object that has the attribute host. There's a string, schema that's a string, and socket schema that's a string. And that's what I end up returning here. Let's see what, but you don't necessarily need that. It just helps when you call the class later. So the advantage of this,
Because it can help you know what's coming.
yeah, so if I go back into my, and I'll show you how to actually set this up. So if I'm here, let's say here, as you're typing, it'll give you this help text. And if you press enter, it'll pull it in. If there's more than one definition, it'll give you a list and you just have to choose from the list. But you can see myservice.config and these .config dot, and you see it gives you a helper because you've named it. If I get rid of that named piece, it won't do that. So if I go, oh, it's just because it's still loaded in memory, but it won't give you that if you don't name it. So that's the advantage of doing the naming.
And what is it? I just want to see the syntax from the import.
Yeah, so it's just import my class and then from, and then you reference the. And Rails will do the Rubyman will do some nice things in terms of when you if you rename the class, it'll search for references and refactor that for you. So if you rename the class, same thing. Not always, but it tries. So does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that way you can write code outside of your components. There really shouldn't be much code inside of your components. There ends up oftentimes being a lot of code in there because that's where you start and it's the easiest place to write a lot of stuff. But components really should just be, what do I want to show or hide? Right? And that's really all you should be doing. So you might have a loop over some things to quickly show the items. You might have an if and an else to be able to show and hide something. But any like serious logic that you're doing, transformations, manipulations, etc., you generally want to do that in a service class that's outside of your component, and then just get the result back. So you see, we do that relatively frequently. So anything that's reused across components, you also want to do that. There is one disadvantage of the way that Stencil does component rendering of HTML. You can't do so where we just do return and then you just write HTML directly. You can't do that outside of a component. So you can't your logic can't manipulate HTML. Okay, it has to be all data-based. And then you can do the manipulation of the data and bring it in and then display the HTML in the component. There is another way that we'll talk about later probably that you can do it outside, but it's not the same. You have to use what they're using behind the scenes, which is this thing called H, which is why you actually,
the H thing.
the thing that you're including all the time,
H,
that H, let me go back to our project. This H here. What that's really doing, it's really cool syntax. It's this helper thing that's basically H. So the problem with the typing stuff is you have to do this as anything to make it not complain at you. But really it's just a function called H. Okay. It won't let you do this because of TypeScript stuff. In raw JavaScript that would work fine. So we just have to do H as any. And then what you pass in is the name of the tag, and then the attributes as an object. So here, if I we could do our app item.
so that's the same as doing the H thing.
Yeah, so these two are equivalent. Might even just work. I'm not sure about that. Yep. See that? But you can use this one in a service. You can't use this one. That makes sense? Yeah. So all they really do, and actually if you look at the JavaScript code, like if you put a debugger in right here, you're going to see that there's two lines that look exactly the same, and they both look like this one. So behind the scenes, they're rendering anything inside of a component that looks like HTML into this H syntax.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Those in the services, could you have put
See that?
.js files?
Just see how they're both exactly the same. What was that?
In the services directory, could you have put .js files, or do they have to be .ts?
That's a good question. I don't know. Yeah. You can certainly have JavaScript files. It makes your life harder, probably, but because then you have more globally scoped things. Unless you're doing unless you're doing module exports, which is essentially what's happening with that TypeScript. So you can, in TypeScript, it's really easy. You just say export class and then put the code in. With the module stuff, you have to do export module dot thing and then get that module associated with the rest of your namespace modules, and you're just gonna make your life harder. So, I wouldn't recommend it. But
I was just more wondering.
Yeah, you probably could do that. But okay. Any questions? So tomorrow I'll show you guys how to use the CRUD library that we created, so you can do really easy interaction with the Rails project that you created, and then from there we'll hopefully we can get into forms if that's where you guys want to go. After that, I have some particular things that I'd like to cover, but there are things that we can cover sort of at any point moving on, so we can get into things like deployment, architecture, clean code, all that kind of stuff. But you should have the basics at that point to be able to go off and build your entire project. So to some extent, it's going to be driven by what you guys are interested in pursuing. So like start thinking about like, where am I having trouble understanding something, or what types of concepts don't I get, or what is something that I'd really like to sort of better understand and I just don't at the moment, and we'll try to teach to that.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, thanks guys. You're doing great.
Yeah.
Well,